Wherever the Wehrmacht went during World War II, you could find the Storch. That was the name of the remarkable plane from Fieseler, the model Fi 156. On the outside, this strut-braced monoplane looked conservative with its long landing gear legs. But with its advanced wing design, it was perfectly suited for the job of an Army liaison and light reconnaissance plane. It set the standard for years to come. Out of all the aircraft in the Luftwaffe, the Storch was the most ubiquitous. Light on the wing, it required a minimum amount of space for takeoff and landing. The plane could land on a strip as short as its own wingspan, and its superb short takeoff and landing characteristics saved the Storch time and again in countless combat situations. The idea behind it came from Gerhard Fieseler and Reinhold Mewis. They wanted to use high-lift devices to achieve the slowest possible flight speeds and the shortest distances for takeoff and landing. The ministry immediately approved and supported the concept. Under their sponsorship, Fieseler Flugzeugbau designed and built the 4-seat Fi 97 intended for the Europa Rundflug competition. Thanks to automatic Handley-Page leading-edge slats that covered 55% of the wingspan and a so-called rolling wing, a flap that extended backward and downward to increase the wing area by 18%. The aircraft demonstrated excellent low-speed performance and unusually short takeoff and landing runs. Back in 1935, Fieseler Flugzeugbau took the concept of a slow-flying aircraft and developed it into the project known as the Fi 156. While it was considered for military roles, it was mainly intended for widespread civil use. The aircraft had a fairly conventional design, a fuselage made of welded steel tubes covered in fabric, a 2-spar wooden wing with a fabric coating, and a tail section sheathed in plywood. However, what really stood out on this machine was the landing gear. It featured 2 long, shock-absorbing struts with steel springs and oil dampers. The tops of these struts were attached to the bottom of pyramidal supports on the sides of the fuselage. The cabin, designed for 3 people, provided excellent visibility. The side panels and the roof, which angled out over the fuselage, were fully glazed with glass. Powering the aircraft was an Argus AS-10C engine. This was an 8-cylinder inverted V-type mounted on a steel tube frame. 2 fuel tanks with a capacity of 40 gallons were located in the center section of the wing. The entire trailing edge of the wing was dedicated to high-lift devices. The outer panel was a statically balanced slotted aileron, while the inner section was a slotted flap. They envisioned 2 variants, the A model, which had a fixed slat made of light alloy, and the B model. The latter featured a retractable slat to provide better performance at higher flight speeds. Through the spring and early summer, they finished 3 A-series prototypes, the V1 with a fixed-pitch metal propeller, the V2 with a wooden fixed-pitch propeller, and the V3, which was fitted with military equipment. The test results exceeded their wildest expectations. The speed ranged from 30 to 105 miles per hour. With a wind of just 8 miles per hour, takeoff required only 130 feet. And landing with that same wind using brakes took just 50 feet. There was no doubt about the potential of the Fi 156 for short-range reconnaissance, observation, and liaison duties. By the fall of 1936, Fieseler Flugzeugbau received instructions to prepare several more aircraft for Army trials and to begin work on the initial production batch. At the same time, the technical department of the RLM issued requirements for a new Army aircraft. Its specifications were practically a perfect match for the new Fieseler. Aside from the specific flight performance data, the only major condition was that the plane had to be powered by the Argus AS-10 engine. Special attention was paid to short takeoff and landing capabilities, as well as excellent visibility for the crew. While the Fi 156 met these demands perfectly, standard RLM protocol required a competition, with prototypes built by at least 2 different manufacturers. The challengers included the Bf-163 from Bayerische Flugzeugwerke, which was generally similar to the Storch. Then there was the C201 from Siebel Flugzeugwerke, a company that had just changed its name from Flugzeugwerke Halle. This was a more radical design featuring a rear-mounted engine and a pusher propeller sitting above a thin tail boom. Finally, there was the FW-186 from Focke-Wulf, which was a jump takeoff autogyro. The autogyro was rejected right out of the gate because at that stage of rotorcraft development, its advantages were simply outweighed by its flaws. It ended up being built as a private venture and underwent testing in 1938. Meanwhile, Bayerische Flugzeugwerke was completely tied up with work on the Bf 109, so they handed off the assembly of their prototype to Weser Flugzeugbau. As a result, testing of the Bf 163 did not begin until 1938. The first C-201 also took to the skies around that same time. But by then, the Storch was already in mass production, so in the end, the competition with BFW and Siebel never really happened. At the beginning of 1937, the first 3 experimental machines were joined by the V4, which was tested during the winter on ski landing gear. The V5 was considered the standard for mass production. By the early spring of 1937, it was followed by 10 A0 pre-production models, which were used for testing and demonstration flights. One of them took part in the 4th International Aviation Meeting in Zurich from July 23 to August 1, 1937. This marked the public debut of the Storch. By that time, it was already in serial production under the designation Fi 156A1. This was the base model, equally suitable for both civilian and military use. Starting in early 1938, Fieseler planned to begin production of the B1 variant. It featured a controllable leading-edge slat and other aerodynamic improvements, which were expected to increase the speed to 130 miles per hour. But the B series intended for commercial use never saw the light of day. By the middle of 1937, the Storch had been fully tested by the Luftwaffe and was highly praised. During the trials, it was established that the aircraft, with a weight of 2,730 pounds and a wing loading of 10 pounds per square foot, maintained controllability at speeds as low as 31 miles per hour. And with a sufficient headwind, it literally hovered in the air in one spot. With a wind of 8 miles per hour, the takeoff run was 164 feet, and the landing run was 59 feet. During tests in a moderate wind, the Storch landed on a plowed field with a landing run of just 16 feet. Such unique flight qualities allowed it to perform a much wider range of missions than just reconnaissance and liaison. The aircraft was tested for laying smoke screens, dropping cargo, and serving as a maritime patrol aircraft with a 300-pound depth charge suspended under the fuselage, and even as a bomber with a 110-pound bomb under the fuselage and 2 similar bombs under the wing. For bombing from a shallow dive, the pilot used aiming marks painted on the windshield, and he determined the dive angle by the inclination of the struts relative to the horizon. Gerhard Fieseler was ordered to expand production capacity for the Storch. It became clear that it would take a long time before they had any room to handle commercial orders. Since there were no new demands to improve the flight performance of the existing model, work on the B series was halted. Instead, all efforts were focused on the A1. Deliveries to the Luftwaffe began during the winter of 1937 and 1938. A few machines from that first batch were sent to Spain to join the Condor Legion, serving as general-purpose transport planes. Production rates climbed throughout 1938, hitting 3 aircraft per week by the end of the year. That was also when work began on the improved C series. The Fi 156C received minor upgrades based on operational experience with the A1. Defensive armament was added, consisting of a single MG-15 machine gun firing rearward through a lens-style mount in the cabin roof. This weapon was supposed to offer some protection, but the Storch's main defense was actually its slow flight speed, which allowed it to dodge attacks from just about any fighter. The machine gun appeared on the pre-series C0 in late 1938, but it wasn't yet standard equipment on the C1. That was the staff and liaison plane, and you could find 1 or 2 of them in every Luftwaffe group. The C1 started rolling off the Kassel assembly line in early 1939. At the same time, they were producing the C2, which was intended for short-range reconnaissance squadrons. This model came standard with the MG-15 and a mount for a camera. It carried a crew of 2. Later on, provisions were made to install a stretcher. Throughout 1939, the Luftwaffe took delivery of 227 Storchs. A small number were delivered to Finland, Switzerland, and the Soviet Union. Hermann Göring actually presented these aircraft as gifts to Mussolini and Stalin. Stalin was so impressed by the machine's capabilities that he ordered it to be put into production immediately. This task fell to Oleg Antonov. Production facilities were set up in Estonia for the airframe and its air-cooled 6-cylinder inline Renault 6Q engine. The aircraft was designated the SHS. A prototype successfully passed testing, but before any production models could be delivered, German troops seized the factory in 1941. When the German offensive in the West began in the summer of 1940, the Fi 156 saw widespread use as an ambulance and rescue aircraft. In its rescue role, it extracted downed pilots from incredibly difficult situations. With the formation of dedicated rescue squadrons, these planes continued to serve in this capacity throughout the entire war. The experience gained in France led to a rather unique experiment involving an aerial pontoon bridge. Trials were held in January 1941 with an engineering battalion near Darmstadt. The idea was that a small bridge, just 1.6 feet wide and made of several 10-foot sections, would be fitted with wings and towed behind a Storch. They attempted to tow bridges ranging from 52 to 92 feet in length, with weights reaching nearly 2,000 pounds. However, the plane proved underpowered for the task, and better results were eventually achieved using the HS-126. Production of the Storch in 1940 totaled 216 machines and doubled in 1941, when Fieseler delivered 430 aircraft. A small number of them were handed over to Bulgaria, Croatia, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. By this time, the assembly lines had switched to the C3 and C5 models. The C3 was a multi-role model suitable for short-range reconnaissance, liaison duties, evacuating the wounded, and rescuing downed pilots. The engines were Argus AS-10P instead of the AS-10C3. The C5 featured the same engine and an external hardpoint for a camera pod or a fuel tank. In the latter case, the flight range increased from 236 to 620 miles. Equipped with dust filters and desert survival gear, the C3 and C5 were used extensively in the Mediterranean theater and North Africa, designated as Trop models. The Storch was a favorite of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. It was his personal aircraft, just as it was for Kesselring. But after a Storch was shot down, Rommel chose the faster FW-189. Running parallel to the C-Series starting in late 1941, the D-Series was produced specifically for desert rescue squadrons. On the right side of the cockpit, they featured a large hatch that opened upward and had no glazing. At the same time, the interior was slightly modified to make it easier to load stretchers. The pre-series D0 appeared in the fall of 1941. It was followed by the D1, which was produced alongside the C-Series until 1944. Another variant of the Storch that appeared in 1941 was the E-Series with tracked landing gear, designed to reduce dependence on airfield surface conditions. Each gear strut had two independently suspended wheels in tandem with a tubular rubber track stretched over them. This increased the contact area of the landing gear and prevented the aircraft from flipping over if it hit an unnoticed furrow, pothole, or rock. A preliminary series of 10 E-0 aircraft with this landing gear was delivered to the Luftwaffe for military trials. Even with the increasing pressure on Fieseler to churn out the Bf-109, production of the Storch in Kassel kept growing. It hit a rate of 40 machines a month throughout 1942. All told, the company delivered 484 aircraft that year. Starting in April, the former Morane-Saulnier plant in Puteaux joined the effort, delivering 121 planes by the end of the year. Fieseler continued ramping up production of the C and D series until August 1943. That month alone, 60 machines rolled off the assembly line in Kassel. However, the need to clear the lines for the FW-190 forced them to cut production down to 30 machines in September and just 2 in October. After that, the jigs and tooling were shipped off to the Mraz factory in Chokin, Czechoslovakia. By the end of 1943, the parent company had produced 480 Storchs, while the plant in Puteaux built 403. And in December 1943, the factory in Chokin delivered its very first Storch. 1943 also saw one of the most dramatic episodes in the Storch's career, the rescue of Benito Mussolini. Hitler tasked SS Hauptsturmführer Otto Skorzeny with finding and freeing Il Duce. Skorzeny soon located him at a hotel on the peak of Gran Sasso in Abruzzo. Accessible only by cable car, the hotel sat at an altitude of 10,000 feet. Initially, a helicopter, the Fokke Achgelis, Fa-223, was chosen for the extraction. But at the last minute, it broke down, so they had to use a Storch instead. Despite the high altitude, the tiny landing strip next to the hotel, and being overloaded on takeoff, the pilot pulled off the mission perfectly. Production of the Storch for the Luftwaffe continued at the Puteaux plant until the middle of August 1944. In 1944 alone, they managed to accept 260 French-built planes. 137 Storchs were delivered from Czechoslovakia throughout that year, though the following year saw no more than a dozen. Later on, the factories in France and Czechoslovakia kept producing this remarkable aircraft for several more years, but this time it was for their own air forces. Between 1937 and 1945, the Luftwaffe accepted just under 2,900 Storchs. About 1 in every 12 of those was sent to Germany's allies. You can't really finish the story of this aircraft without mentioning the Fi-256. Fieseler designed it in 1941 as a civilian, 4-seat successor to the B model. Even though the Fi-256 followed the same general layout as the Storch, it was a completely brand new machine. It didn't share a single interchangeable part with its predecessor. It was much cleaner aerodynamically, featuring automatic leading-edge slats, and inside the cabin was roomier, with the pilot's seat up front and 2 pairs of passenger seats right behind it. Fieseler pitched the 256 to the technical department as the next evolution of the Storch, but they didn't go for it. Only 2 prototypes were built by the factory in Puteaux between 1943 and 1944. Now looking at the Fieseler Fi 156C2 Storch, this is a strut-braced monoplane designed for close-range reconnaissance. It carries a crew of 2. It features mixed construction using a combination of wood, steel, and light alloys. It is a high-wing design, the wings attached to specific points on the canopy frame and connect to the lower fuselage longeron using a pair of streamlined steel struts on each side. Between the wing and those V-shaped main struts, there are additional N-shaped supports. For storage, the wings can actually fold back to save space, pivoting on hinges located at the trailing edge. Viewed from above, the wing is rectangular. It doesn't taper, and it has rounded tips. It has a fairly high aspect ratio of 7.8 and a wing loading of 9.8 pounds per square foot. The internal wing structure is wooden, built around 2 spars and a set of ribs. Except for the joint ribs near the root, all the ribs are identical and feature a truss-type design. The wings are fabric-covered except for the leading edge, which is plywood, and the joint areas, which are sheathed in metal. Fixed slats are mounted along the entire leading edge of the wing. They feature all-metal construction made from duralumin sheet. The slat on each wing consists of 2 sections, the root and the tip. Both feature a set of ribs and are skinned with sheet metal just 12/1000ths of an inch thick. These slats attach to the wing's nose on stamped brackets, 7 on each side of the fuselage. The ailerons, which take up about half the wingspan, are the drooping type. They work in conjunction with the flaps. When the flaps are lowered for landing, the ailerons also drop down 17 degrees. The aileron frame is made of wood and covered in fabric. The rest of the trailing edge is taken up by slotted flaps, built very much like the ailerons. The fuselage consists of a welded steel tube truss structure covered in fabric. This fabric is laced together along the bottom center line of the plane. Up front, the engine mount attaches to the truss. In the middle sits the cockpit with 2 seats arranged in tandem, though the rear seat is offset slightly to the right. The seats are adjustable and feature pans designed to accommodate parachutes. On later production models, there was a third, folding jump seat for a passenger, which didn't have a backrest. The cockpit is heavily glazed in the front, top, and sides. The side windows actually bulge out past the main fuselage lines. The window framework is actually an integral part of the fuselage truss. The pilot and passengers enter through a door on the right side that opens toward the rear. Behind the cockpit on the right, the fabric covering has a zipper. This allows access to the radio and camera equipment when needed. There is also an irregularly shaped cargo hatch on the right side. The rear section of the fuselage is empty. The tail assembly follows a classic design, featuring symmetrical aerodynamic profiles. The vertical fin is built on a steel tube frame covered in fabric. The stabilizer base is made of wood, also fabric covered, though its leading edge is reinforced with plywood. Steel tube struts, encased in duralumin fairings, brace the fin to the stabilizer. The control surfaces are wooden and wrapped in fabric, featuring aerodynamic horn balances. There is also a trim tab located near the top of the rudder. The landing gear uses a 3-point setup with a tail support. The main gear struts are designed like independent pyramids, braced against the fuselage and the wing roots. You can even find small steps on the struts to help the crew climb into the cockpit or for maintenance work. Shock absorption is handled by a combination of springs and air oil struts. Upon landing, the impact load transfers first to the fuselage's central spar, and then spreads through the main struts to the wing mounts. The main wheels measure 20 by 7 inches and are equipped with hydraulic brakes. The tail skid is fixed in place, dampened by both a spring and an oleo strut. On the C7 and D2 models, they installed a tail wheel measuring 7 by 4 inches. In the winter, the wheels can be swapped out for metal skis held in tension by bungee cords. These skis feature a unique mechanical brake to shorten the landing run. Even the tail skid gets fitted with its own small ski. Powering the aircraft is the Argus AS-10C engine. It is an 8-cylinder inverted V-type design that is air-cooled. Takeoff power is rated at 240 horsepower. It sits on a mount made of 2 beams braced from below. The engine is enclosed in a streamlined cowling made from aluminum alloy panels. Cooling air enters through a large intake at the bottom front of the nose. Exhaust from each cylinder bank flows into side manifolds on the exterior, and from there, the gases are vented through pipes running down and back beneath the cowling. Starting the engine is done by hand. A firewall separates the engine compartment from the cockpit. The Schwartz propeller was a fixed-pitch, 2-bladed design made of wood, featuring metal sheathing on the leading edges and measuring 13.1 feet in diameter. Tucked inside the root of the left wing, right between the spars, were 2 fuel tanks. The inner tank held 20 gallons, while the outer one carried 26 gallons. These tanks were made of fiber and had filler caps right on top. For longer missions, it was possible to mount an auxiliary drop tank holding 53 gallons underneath the fuselage. A 4-gallon oil tank sat inside the fuselage, just behind the firewall. As for the oil cooler, it was housed in a cylindrical casing and mounted on brackets beneath the nose of the plane. Control of the aircraft relied on a cable and bell crank system. The pilot flew using a standard control stick and rudder pedals. The Storch was equipped with navigation lights and a landing light housed in a fairing under the left wing. The 24-volt electrical system was powered by a battery. Most of these machines did not actually carry radios. They were only standard issue for artillery spotters and certain personal aircraft. In those cases, a mast was mounted above the cockpit, with the antenna wire stretched back to the top of the rudder. When the plane was used for reconnaissance, a mapping camera was installed in the rear of the cockpit. The C2 variant was armed with an MG-15 machine gun, caliber 0.31 inches, mounted on an LL-15 ring in a bulge on the rear ceiling. It carried 200 rounds of ammunition in 4 magazines, and the spent shell casings were collected in a leather bag.